Abraham Lincoln got paid in raccoon pelts. Nikola Tesla was romantically involved with a pigeon. And one founding father wrote a real essay called Fart Proudly. The people who built America were genuinely, spectacularly strange. These are 32 absurd things famous Americans actually did that your history book was too embarrassed to include. 1. You see the name Kellogg, and you think breakfast, maybe a rooster on a box. Wholesome morning vibes. But the man who created Corn Flakes, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, was not trying to brighten your mornings. He was trying to destroy your sex drive. Seriously. Kellogg was absolutely convinced that the root of nearly every human ailment was masturbation, or as he delicately called it, the sin of self-pollution. His solution? The blandest food imaginable. Those plain cornflakes were engineered on purpose, to be so boring they'd kill any hint of desire. His Battle Creek Sanitarium was basically a shrine to this philosophy, promoting daily enemas with machines he personally designed, yogurt douches, and a lifestyle stripped of anything remotely enjoyable. Bet that changes how you feel about your morning cereal. 2. Dolly Madison gets remembered as the elegant wife of President James Madison, a gracious hostess, a fashion icon, the kind of first lady who made dinner parties legendary. That reputation is fine, but it misses the best part. In 1814, British troops were torching Washington, D.C. during the War of 1812, and the White House was next on their list. Most people ran. Dolly Madison did not. She flat out refused to evacuate until she had personally supervised the removal of Gilbert Stuart's enormous portrait of George Washington from its frame. Picture it: a woman in full corset gear, wrestling a massive painting off a wall while literal explosions shook the building and the Capitol burned around her. Forget gracious hostess. That is historical preservation at gunpoint levels of commitment. 3. Alexander Hamilton went on to become the mastermind behind America's entire financial system. But the story of how he even got to the mainland is almost too dramatic to be real. At 17, Hamilton was an orphan living on the island of St. Croix when a catastrophic hurricane ripped through the Caribbean. Young Hamilton sat down and wrote a letter about the experience. Except it wasn't really a letter. It was a full-blown apocalyptic fever dream, drenched in religious imagery, overflowing with melodrama, and so intensely vivid that local community leaders read it and were genuinely stunned. Impressed, maybe a little alarmed by the sheer intensity of this teenager, they pooled their resources and shipped him off to North America for a proper education. Possibly just to get the teenage doomsday poet off their island before he started prophesying plagues. 4. John Quincy Adams, the 6th President of the United States, was a man of deep intellect and serious diplomacy. He was also a man who really enjoyed swimming naked in the Potomac River at dawn. This was his daily ritual. No swimsuit, no shame, just the president slicing through the water in his birthday suit, rain or shine. Now, there is a story, possibly exaggerated but far too entertaining to leave out, about a journalist named Anne Royal who had been chasing an interview with Adams for weeks and getting absolutely nowhere. So one morning, she tracked him down mid-swim, marched straight to the riverbank, collected his pile of clothes, and parked herself right on top of them. No interview, no pants. That is commitment to the craft of journalism right there. 5. Here is a tale ripped straight from the most extreme frontier legends imaginable. Jeremiah Johnson, better known as Liver-Eating Johnson. This mountain man allegedly launched a one-man, decades-long revenge campaign against the Crow tribe after they supposedly killed his Native American wife. The story goes that he hunted down over 300 Crow warriors and, as a horrifying signature move, cut out and ate their livers. Is it true? Almost certainly exaggerated to the point of fantasy, maybe entirely invented. But the fact that this nickname followed him everywhere, and that people on the frontier genuinely believed it, tells you everything about the blood-soaked mythology of the American West. Also, maybe skip the liver and onions tonight. Just a thought. 6. Belle Starr earned the title Bandit Queen of the Wild West. A woman tangled up with outlaws, gunfights, and the wrong side of the law at every turn. But rewind to her early years, and the picture looks completely different. Born Myra Maybelle Shirley, young Belle had ambitions that leaned far less toward crime and far more toward the fashion pages. Even when her family was barely scraping by financially, she was reportedly fixated on luxurious clothing, expensive velvet dresses, elaborate hats dripping with ostrich feathers. She fantasized about a life of elegance and high society, which is about as far from dusty outlaw trails and dodging bounty hunters as you can possibly get. Turns out, even future bandits can dream of walking a runway before they ride with a gang. 7. Hedy Green was nicknamed the Witch of Wall Street, and she earned every syllable of that title. During the Gilded Age, she was the wealthiest woman in the entire country, a financial shark who built an absolutely massive fortune. She was also, without exaggeration, one of the most pathologically cheap people in recorded history. She reportedly wore the same black dress day after day until it disintegrated. She ate cold oatmeal because heating it would cost money. She once spent hours tearing her office apart looking for a 2-cent stamp. And the worst part? Her son Ed ended up losing his leg because Hedy spent so long hunting for free medical treatment that gangrene took hold. A woman sitting on millions, living in self-imposed poverty, held hostage by her own staggering greed. 8. Howard Hughes, billionaire, aviator, filmmaker, and a man whose eccentricities could fill an encyclopedia. And these quirks did not arrive in old age. They were baked in from day one. During his younger years, Hughes once purchased every single seat on a commercial airplane flight. Not for security, not for privacy. He wanted to transport a very specific pie he loved from one city to another, and he was not about to let some stranger's elbow compromise that pie. Then came the bra incident. While producing his film, The Outlaw with Jane Russell, Hughes, who was also a licensed pilot and legitimate aeronautical engineer, personally designed a custom cantilevered brassiere using actual aircraft design principles to maximize her on-screen presentation. Because when you are Howard Hughes, pies fly first class and bras require engineering degrees. 9. They nicknamed him Old Hickory because the man was basically made of iron and bad intentions. Andrew Jackson, the 7th president, the fierce-looking figure on the $20 bill. But long before the White House, Jackson spent most of his time on the dueling field, and he was terrifyingly good at it. Over 100 duels. That is not a misprint. 100 documented confrontations. In one especially brutal encounter, his opponent fired first and lodged a bullet dangerously close to Jackson's heart. A normal human would have dropped. Jackson did not. He just stood there, blood pooling, calmly steadied his pistol and shot the other man dead. That bullet stayed embedded in his chest for the rest of his life. Different era? Absolutely. And by different, I mean genuinely nightmarish. 10. Nikola Tesla was the genius who gave humanity alternating current and helped electrify the modern world. His brain operated on a frequency most of us cannot even imagine. But that kind of brilliance came packaged with some truly spectacular personal oddities. Tesla was terrified of round objects, pearls, billiard balls. Anything spherical sent him spiraling. He had an almost violent aversion to human hair. If someone wearing pearl earrings sat near him, he could barely function. And then there was the pigeon. One specific white pigeon that Tesla became deeply, intensely attached to. He claimed to love this bird the way a person loves another person, and he was convinced the two of them communicated telepathically. Revolutionary inventor? Without question. Someone you would invite to a casual dinner party? Absolutely not. 11. Before George W. Bush occupied the Oval Office, he held a very different leadership position. Head cheerleader at Phillips Academy in Andover. That is correct. The future commander-in-chief was out front with the megaphone and the school spirit, rallying the crowd. But this was not standard issue by the book cheerleading. Young Bush was reportedly famous for routines that were wildly energetic, borderline chaotic, and occasionally so provocative that school administrators considered shutting down the entire cheerleading squad more than once. Rubber chickens were allegedly involved. Improvisational cheers that pushed every boundary of good taste apparently happened regularly. Whether you see it as early evidence of showmanship or a preview of future controversy, the man clearly had a knack for commanding attention from the very beginning. 12. Walt Disney built an empire on fairy tales and animated mice. But the man behind the magic had a hustler's instinct long before Hollywood. At 16, Disney lied about his age to enlist in the Red Cross Ambulance Corps during World War I and was shipped off to France. He did drive an ambulance, sure, but he also kept himself busy with some entrepreneurial side projects. He covered his ambulance bumper to bumper in cartoon drawings, which his commanding officers probably did not love. Even more profitably, he got his hands on discarded German helmets, carefully added fake bullet holes and convincing battle damage, and then sold these authentic war relics to fellow soldiers at a healthy markup. The gift for storytelling and apparently for creative exaggeration was deeply embedded in the Disney DNA from the start. 13. George Eastman is the man who democratized photography. He founded Kodak, introduced the Brownie camera, and gave the world the slogan, "You press the button, we do the rest." A genuine pioneer. But once success and wealth were in his hands, Eastman developed a fixation that clashes pretty hard with his legacy. He became consumed with big game hunting, specifically elephants. He funded elaborate, expensive expeditions to Africa not to photograph wildlife, but to track down and kill the biggest bull elephant he could find. He wanted the ultimate trophy. There is something deeply ironic about a man who made it possible for millions to capture images of living things being equally obsessed with taking down one of the most majestic animals on the planet. Snap the photo, pull the trigger. 14. Dr. Benjamin Rush was a founding father, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and a man whose medical practices would make a modern doctor faint. Rush was an absolutely devoted believer in bloodletting, as a cure for essentially everything. Headache? Open a vein. Feeling anxious? Drain more blood. He was convinced that most diseases were caused by excess blood in the system. But his real masterpiece of medical horror was the so-called tranquilizing chair. This was not a relaxing piece of furniture. Mentally ill patients were physically strapped down, their heads locked inside a wooden box, completely immobilized and deprived of sight and sound, sometimes for days at a stretch. The supposed purpose was to calm them by cutting off sensory input. In practice, it was closer to a torture device with a medical label slapped on it. 15. Barack Obama, the cool and composed 44th president, had a childhood in Indonesia that included a rather chaotic household member, a pet ape named Tata. And Tata was not some cuddly, well-behaved companion. This ape was a full-time neighborhood menace, infamous for stealing fruit from nearby trees and snatching laundry right off people's clotheslines. A genuine primate criminal with zero remorse. To make things even more memorable, Tata once chomped down on young Barry's finger, delivering an early and very literal lesson in handling unpredictable situations. Maybe that experience is exactly what trained him for the chaos of American politics. Because honestly, if you have already survived living with a thieving, biting ape, dealing with Congress probably feels manageable by comparison. 16. American history has produced some spectacular eccentrics, but few come close to Joshua Norton I. A businessman in 1800 San Francisco, Norton lost his fortune in a disastrous rice speculation gamble. His response to financial ruin? He declared himself Norton I, Emperor of the United States. And because why stop there? Protector of Mexico. The genuinely wild part is that San Francisco basically shrugged and accepted it. Local newspapers published his royal proclamations, which included orders to dissolve the United States Congress. Certain restaurants and shops honored his self-printed currency. Theaters saved him a seat at every show. He became one of the city's most beloved figures. Was he delusional? Probably. Was he hurting anyone? Not at all. Just a man who crowned himself emperor and an entire city that decided to go along with it. 17. Martha Mitchell was the wife of Nixon's Attorney General John Mitchell, a loud, colorful Southern socialite who adored media attention. But when she started publicly dropping hints about corruption inside the Nixon White House, well before the Watergate scandal exploded, she was immediately labeled unstable, a drunk, a hysterical woman who could not keep her mouth shut. The establishment worked overtime to discredit her. There are reports she was physically restrained, drugged, and held in a hotel room in California to keep her away from reporters. Everyone called her delusional. And then Watergate unraveled. Every single accusation she had been making, every warning she had been screaming into the void, turned out to be completely and horrifyingly accurate. She told the truth before anyone was ready to hear it, and they punished her for it. 18. If you have ever heard the expression, failing upward, allow me to introduce the concept's patron saint, Lord Timothy Dexter, an 18th century New England merchant who turned terrible decisions into gold through sheer cosmic luck. This man once staged his own funeral while still alive, just to observe who would show up and cry. When his wife failed to shed enough tears, he reportedly beat her with a cane for the poor performance. He wrote an entire book called A Pickle for the Knowing Ones, with zero punctuation, not a single comma or period. And when people complained, he released a second edition with an extra page consisting entirely of punctuation marks, telling readers to sprinkle them in wherever they saw fit. His business deals were equally absurd. He shipped bed-warming pans to the tropical West Indies, where locals repurposed them as molasses ladles. He sent coal to Newcastle, a city famous for exporting coal, and hit a miners' strike, making a fortune. Pure, baffling, accidental brilliance. 19. Long before the world knew Mark Twain, there was Samuel Clemens, a bored, frustrated teenager stuck working as a printer's apprentice and absolutely miserable about it. He despised the monotonous labor. He clashed with his employer constantly, and every fiber of his restless soul was screaming for something bigger. So he did what any future literary genius would do. He ran away, multiple times. One of those escapes carried him all the way to New York City, a young nobody wandering the streets with nothing but ambition and an itch for adventure that the print shop could never scratch. It is a reminder that sometimes the road to becoming one of America's greatest writers begins with a burning need to get as far away from your day job as humanly possible. 20. Buckminster Fuller was the visionary behind the geodesic dome, a futurist thinker who spent his life reimagining how humans could live more efficiently. He was also a man who took self-tracking to a level that would make modern fitness app developers weep with envy. From 1915 to 1917, Fuller conducted an obsessive personal experiment he called the Dymaxion Chronophile. For 2 entire years, he documented every single aspect of his daily existence: what he ate, when he slept, what he read, who he spoke to, what crossed his mind. All logged in 15-minute intervals. Every quarter hour, without fail. His goal was to identify hidden patterns in human behavior and optimize his own life accordingly. The resulting record reportedly stretched to 270 feet in length. That is not a journal. That is a monument to compulsive self-surveillance. 21. The popular image of Benjamin Franklin is the wise elder statesman, bifocals, kite string in hand, dispensing sage advice to a young nation. But scratch the surface, and you discover a founding father with a decidedly scandalous side hustle. Before he was wooing French aristocrats as America's ambassador, Franklin was penning some truly eyebrow-raising personal counsel. He wrote what was essentially a detailed instruction manual for young men on how to choose a mistress. His #1 recommendation? Pursue older women. His reasoning, in his own unforgettable phrasing, was that they are so grateful. Practical to the core, that man. And if that was not enough to make polite society choke on its tea, he also authored a genuine philosophical essay titled Fart Proudly, a formal treatise on flatulence. The diplomat, the inventor, and the connoisseur of bodily acoustics, all the same person. 22. John Adams, the second president, a towering intellect, one of the essential architects of American independence. You picture a serious man, hunched over legal documents, forging a new republic with the sheer force of his mind. And that picture is accurate, but his private journals reveal a considerably more human side. Adams apparently kept remarkably candid notes about his own digestive system, including detailed observations about his flatulence. A founding father maintaining a fart log. Let that settle in. And beyond the intestinal documentation, Adams also made one of the most audacious professional decisions in colonial history. As a lawyer in Boston, he chose to defend the British soldiers accused in the Boston Massacre. In a city demanding blood, this was political suicide in slow motion. Yet he did it anyway, principled, windy, and completely one of a kind. 23. Henry Ford reshaped civilization by putting the automobile within reach of ordinary Americans. But before the assembly line, before the Model T, there was a teenage boy on a one-man mission to dismantle every watch in his neighborhood. Young Ford was not interested in collecting timepieces. He wanted to tear them open. He would get his hands on any watch he could find, borrowed from friends, swiped from neighbors, taken from anyone careless enough to leave one unattended, and take it apart piece by piece. Putting them back together was another matter entirely. His so-called improvements frequently rendered the watches completely and permanently dead. His very first paying job, in a twist that borders on comedy, was as a watch repairman. One can only imagine the customer reviews. Brought in a working watch, got back a pile of gears and a sincere apology. 24. Before P.T. Barnum built the greatest show on earth, he had already mastered the fine art of selling people things that were not remotely real. Barnum understood something fundamental about human nature. People do not just want entertainment, they want to be magnificently deceived. Take the legendary Fiji mermaid, an enchanting sea creature pulled from mysterious depths? Not exactly. It was the dried torso of a monkey stitched onto the tail end of a large fish. Disgusting? Sure. But crowds paid money to stand in line for a look. Then there was General Tom Thumb, a genuinely small man whom Barnum surrounded with completely fabricated stories about his origins and age, turning him into a massive sensation. Barnum was never really selling oddities. He was selling the intoxicating possibility that something impossible might actually be real, even if it reeked of fish and taxidermy glue. 25. Long before he became Honest Abe, the great emancipator and savior of the Union, Abraham Lincoln was pulling pints. He co-owned a rough little saloon in Illinois called Barry and Lincoln, and the word rustic does not even begin to cover it. Out on the frontier, actual cash was a rare commodity, so customers paid their bar tabs with whatever they happened to have available. We are talking chickens, animal hides, blocks of homemade soap, maybe a dented horseshoe if it was a slow week. Try keeping your accounting ledger straight when your revenue includes a sack of potatoes and a raccoon pelt. It must have been an absolute circus of barter, odd smells, and creative negotiation. Really puts a fresh spin on the term liquid assets. 26. Andrew Johnson stepped into the presidency under the worst possible circumstances, right after Lincoln's assassination, and things only got harder from there. Facing impeachment, despised by large portions of Congress and the public alike, Johnson was an incredibly isolated man. And in that isolation, he found comfort in the strangest possible place: a family of white mice living in his White House bedroom. According to reports, Johnson would set out crumbs and flour for them at night, speak to them softly, and apparently found a genuine sense of peace in their tiny, skittering company during one of the most chaotic presidencies in American history. When your political allies have abandoned you and impeachment is knocking at your door, even a mouse starts to look like a loyal friend compared to Congress. 27. Thomas Edison, the Wizard of Menlo Park, the man who gave humanity the light bulb, the phonograph, and roughly 1,000 other inventions that shaped the modern world. You would assume a brain like that was spotted and nurtured from childhood, right? Completely wrong. After barely a few months of formal school, young Edison was pulled out. His teacher had officially branded him addled, which in the language of the era meant mentally deficient, essentially too stupid to bother educating. His mother, absolutely livid at the verdict, yanked him out and took over his education at home. And the rest, as they say, is history. One teacher's hopeless case turned into one of the most prolific inventors humanity has ever produced. If that is not a case for second opinions, nothing is. 28. Years before Orson Welles directed legendary films like Citizen Kane, he terrified an entire nation with nothing but a microphone and a script. On Halloween night in 1938, 23-year-old Welles and his Mercury Theater on the Air performed a radio dramatization of H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds. But instead of presenting it as a normal radio play, Welles formatted the whole thing as a series of breaking news bulletins, complete with frantic field reporters and panicked expert commentary, describing an alien invasion hitting New Jersey in real time. It was so convincingly done that thousands of listeners genuinely believed Martians had landed. People poured into the streets, phone lines collapsed under the volume of calls, and families prepared for the literal end of civilization. All because one young man with a flair for drama proved just how powerful and dangerous a well-told story can be. 29. Edgar Allan Poe built his literary legacy on darkness, tales of madness, death, and ravens tapping at chamber doors. His real life was every bit as haunted and strange as his fiction, and his romantic history includes a detail that is deeply uncomfortable by any standard. At 27 years old, Poe married Virginia Clem. Virginia was his first cousin, and she was 13 years old. Cousin marriages were not entirely unusual for the period, but even by those relaxed standards, her age was a problem. So Poe handled it the way you might expect from a man who wrote about walling people up alive. He falsified the marriage certificate, listing her age as 21. Nothing screams healthy love story quite like forging legal documents to wed a child relative. It definitely casts a disturbing light over all those poems about beautiful young women dying tragically. 30. Steve Jobs, the visionary in the black turtleneck, the man who put an iPhone in your pocket and fundamentally changed how humans interact with technology. But rewind to his early career at Atari, and the picture is considerably less sleek. Young Jobs was a committed fruitarian who genuinely believed that eating only fruit eliminated the need for regular bathing. Showers, in his mind, were simply unnecessary. His co-workers, assaulted daily by evidence to the contrary, would have strongly disagreed. To add to the workplace experience, Jobs also had a habit of walking around the office completely barefoot and, this is real, washing his feet in the company toilets. The combination of the smell, the attitude, and the general intensity of his personality eventually got him reassigned to the night shift. Even future billionaires, it turns out, can have some spectacularly pungent growing pains. 31. Al Capone. Scarface. The very name conjures images of Tommy guns, bootleg whiskey, and the ruthless king of Chicago's criminal underworld. And those scars across his face, surely earned in some vicious shootout or a knife fight with a rival gangster in a dark alley, right? Not even close. The true origin story is far less cinematic. Young Capone was working as a bouncer at a bar when he decided to make some vulgar comments to a woman named Lena Galluccio. Her brother Frank did not appreciate the commentary. Frank pulled a knife and gave Capone's face 3 quick, deep slashes right then and there. And just like that, the most iconic facial scars in criminal history were born. Not from a gang war, not from a daring heist, but from a spectacular lesson in minding your manners. His most famous feature was basically a bad Yelp review of his social skills. 32. Lyndon B. Johnson was famous for the Johnson treatment. That intense, physically imposing method of political arm-twisting that could bend senators to his will. But LBJ had an even more aggressive approach to power dynamics that started long before the presidency. The man routinely conducted important meetings, sensitive phone calls, and high-level political negotiations while sitting on the toilet. With the bathroom door wide open, aides, advisors, sometimes even journalists would be standing there trying to maintain professional composure while the future president discussed policy and handled personal business simultaneously. Was it a deliberate dominance tactic? A complete absence of shame? Or did the man simply find his porcelain throne to be the most productive seat in the building? Whatever the reason, it redefines the concept of an open-door policy in ways nobody ever asked for. Be honest in the comments. Which famous American on this list just lost your respect forever? And which one actually gained it? Drop both numbers. Hit like if your brain broke at least once during this video, and subscribe. Because next time, we leave America, and the stories get even more unhinged.